All right, Chapter 3, Audit Reports. Here, there are essentially 4 different types of reports that an auditor can issue when they have been hired to audit a particular company. And so the first of those is what's called the Standard Unqualified Audit Report. In the industry, it's simply called a clean opinion, and it has 8 distinct parts. The first part is the report title. In that title, it's going to say something along the form of Independent Auditor's Report, Report of Independent Auditor, or something like that. The key word that needs to be placed in the title is the fact that the auditor is independent. The second part is the audit report address. And it's not really a street address that they're talking about there. What they're talking about is what party do we address the audit report to? Are we addressing it to the corporation? Are we addressing it to the board of directors of the corporation? Are we addressing it to the shareholders of the corporation? That needs to be clarified, and who's being addressed. It kind of depends. If you are a private company, it could be the board of directors. It might not be the shareholders. Anyway, it's something that has to be addressed at some point. The fourth, or excuse me, the third is the introductory paragraph. And there, the main thing that we're trying to do here is to tell our readers that we, the audit firm, have been hired to perform an audit. And the reason you do this is to distinguish between the fact that what you're doing is an audit versus either a review or a compilation, the other 2 types of services that a CPA firm might offer. And so the other thing that needs to be addressed in this introductory paragraph is which statements the audit firm's been hired to audit. And almost invariably, they're hired to audit all 4 financial statements plus the notes plus supplementary information. The fourth section talks about management's responsibility. And if you look at Figure 3-1, it says that management is responsible for the preparation and fair presentation of the financial statements in accordance with Accounting Standards, GAAP. That's pretty standard wording that you'll see in almost any audit report. Section 5, the auditor's responsibility. Here we get down to 3 things. The first of those is that the report needs to state that the audit was conducted in accordance with auditing standards. Should also note that the audit's designed to obtain reasonable assurance about whether or not the statements are free from material misstatement. The other thing that needs to be discussed here is the fact that the auditor needs to describe the scope of the audits and the evidence accumulated in kind of a general fashion. And so usually, if you look at, again, at exhibit or figure 3-1, just talks in general about what the audit involves. Involves performing procedures to obtain audit evidence about the amounts and disclosures. Procedures selected depend on the auditor's judgment, including the assessment of the risk of material misstatement, things like that. So look at that. That's a pretty long description of what, in general, the auditor does when performing an audit. And then last but not least, in the third paragraph, they indicate whether or not the auditor believes that sufficient appropriate evidence talked about in the second paragraph has been obtained in order to support the auditor's opinion. Next is the opinion paragraph, and this is what all users are looking for. Matter of fact, they may skip over some of this other stuff because it's pretty standard in a clean opinion. You know, most of this other stuff is fairly academic and standard. Many users, what they do is they'll go directly to the opinion paragraph to see if whether or not it's clean or something else. And if it's clean, they'll just ignore the first 5 sections, and because that's what they're looking for. They're wanting to know if it's a clean opinion. So this is the climax right here. This is what the users are looking for, to see whether or not we have a clean opinion. If not, then they're going to backtrack and find out why not. And so understand that this is an opinion. This is not a guarantee of results. And all it's doing is saying that in the auditor's opinion that the financial statements are fairly stated in accordance with GAAP. 7, name and address of the CPA firm, not a big deal. Audit report date. This is important. It's could be 2 or 3 months, this date, after the date of the financial statements. Let's say the financial statements are as of December 31st of a particular year. Well, the audit report date might be February, might be sometime in March. And so it's important because it indicates the last day of the auditor's responsibility for the review of significant events that have occurred after the date of the financial statements. And so the auditor, it really is responsible for finding out about subsequent events between the time of the end of the accounting period that they're reporting on up to the date of the opinion. So that can become a very important date, especially in litigation, if some subsequent event that occurs after the financial statement date occurs and is not discovered by and reported on by the CPA firm. And so, as they point out, there are 4 conditions that must be met before you can issue a standard unqualified report. The report, the financial statement report, must include all financial statements, all 4 financial statements. The auditor must have acquired sufficient appropriate evidence and conducted the audit in such a way that enables him or her to conclude that the audit was performed in accordance with GAAS. Third, the financial statements the financial statements are presented in accordance with U.S. GAAP. And 4, no circumstances require an explanatory paragraph or report modification. If any of these are insufficient, then the auditor is forbidden from issuing an unqualified audit report. They must do something else. And so if you look at figure 3-2, here you have your 4 categories of audit reports. You have your standard unqualified. If it meets the 4 conditions stated, you as an auditor can issue a standard unqualified opinion. If any of those 3 are not included, then you've got to go to one of these other categories. You might go to an unqualified with emphasis of matter or explanatory paragraph. You might have to issue a qualified report. You might have to issue either an adverse report or a disclaimer of opinion. So we'll talk about when these things occur. Now, what we just talked about really dealt with more what AICPA standards require. Again, PCAOB for public companies is pretty close. The big difference between the two is the fact that for private companies, the report does not have to include an opinion on the auditor's, it doesn't have to include an auditor's opinion on the company's internal controls. So, do they have to look at internal controls in determining risk and the amount of audit evidence that they have to compile? Yes, absolutely. But they are not rendering an opinion on the adequacy of the company's internal controls. Completely different for public companies. PCAOB requires public companies and the
Yes, I went to Costco for that.
the accounting firms who audit public companies requires the accounting firms to issue an opinion not only on the adequacy of whether or not the financial statements are fairly stated, but also requires an opinion on the adequacy of internal controls as well. So a little bit different type of opinion. You still have your introductory paragraph, your scope, definition, inherent limits, things like that. The big difference is that you're going to have an opinion not only on whether or not the financial statements are fairly stated, you're going to have an opinion on whether or not internal controls are adequate. And that's kind of a minimum requirement, by the way. Now, you could do these opinions in concerning financial statements and internal controls in a different report or the same report. Most often what I've seen is that the opinions of statements and internal controls are combined into one report with an opinion first about whether or not the financial statements are fairly stated, and then another opinion concerning the adequacy of internal controls. But you can certainly do two different reports as well. And here we show one of those cases where the auditor has decided to issue a separate report on internal control, but you don't have to. And so there are 5 circumstances when an unqualified report with an emphasis of matter explanatory paragraph or modified wording is appropriate. The first would be where there's a lack of consistent application of generally accepted accounting principles. The second is where there's substantial doubt about whether or not the corporation is a going concern. Third is where the auditor agrees with a departure from promulgated accounting principles. 4 would be when there's an emphasis of a matter, the auditor thinks there's something that needs to be emphasized, so they have a separate paragraph concerning that. And then 5, reports involving other auditors. For big companies that have, let's say, multinational operations, you might have more than one auditor doing an audit. For instance, you might have a separate auditor auditing a subsidiary of a multinational company. So the first, lack of consistent application of GAAP. The auditor must note the circumstances in which the accounting principles are not consistently applied. And the auditor should modify the report when a material change occurs by adding an explanatory paragraph in the report. Substantial doubt about a going concern. Here, the company expresses some concerns about whether or not this company can continue on in its current state. And so some conditions or issues that come up that would cause an auditor to have a substantial doubt about whether or not this corporation is a going concern are the following. there are significant recurring operating losses or working capital deficiencies. And again, some of these could be more than just one. In other words, there may be the existence of more than one of these going on within the company. And so you might have a company that not only has working capital deficiencies, but also has the next one, the inability of the company to pay its obligations as they come due. Those things kind of go hand in hand. Loss of major customers, the occurrence of uninsured catastrophes. And last but not least, legal proceedings, legislation that might, well, either one of these, bottom line is they might jeopardize the entity's ability to operate in the future. You get some large judgment against you in a lawsuit that has to be paid back, that could really impact whether or not the entity stays in business or whether they have to liquidate to pay the debt. You know, let's say you're a mining company and the EPA is about to shut you down. Well, that's certainly going to jeopardize your ability to operate as well. So in that case, this is where, even though, and again, even though remember when you're adding this emphasis paragraph, you the auditor are still giving a report that says that the financial statements fairly represent the company's financial position. You're not denying that. You're just saying, in the case of substantial doubt about going concern, that even though the statements are fairly stated in accordance with GAAP, there's these things going on that may hinder the company's ability to continue operating. Next, they talk about when the auditor agrees with a departure from a promulgated principle. There may be reasons why a company might want to depart from GAAP, and if so, in not all cases would that departure require you to issue either a qualified or an adverse opinion. And so if you still believe that the financial statements are fairly stated in accordance with GAAP, you would issue the opinion that it is in accordance with GAAP, but you would also enter this separate paragraph explaining that adhering to whatever the principle would be would have produced a misleading result. And so I've never seen anything like this. I think it would be very unusual to have this situation going on, but who knows? Maybe there is such a situation and I'm just not aware of it. So they talk about different examples of where you might do this. Existence of material related party transactions. I'm sorry, I'm on the next one. All right. Emphasis of a matter. You may want to emphasize specific matters regarding the financial statements. And again, even though you're doing this, you're intending on issuing a clean opinion, unqualified opinion. And they give you some examples of when this could occur. You might have a big one that I've seen is where there's some subsequent event that is material enough to bear mentioning in the financial statement opinion. You know, let's say there was a fire at a major plant of the corporation. That's pretty material and would need some emphasis in the auditor's report. Related party transactions, if they're fairly substantial, it might bear some noting in a separate paragraph. Material uncertainties. There might be something in the footnotes talking about these uncertainties that the CPA believes needs to come out in the opinion report. And then last one they have here, there might be some reason why the financial statements are not comparable. A change in accounting principles from one period to another might cause the financial statements not to be comparable. Last but not least, reports involving other auditors would be a reason why you might have a separate paragraph or a paragraph giving emphasis to a certain matter. And so you have three options here, and it kind of depends on the materiality of the work done by the other auditors. If what the other auditors did is fairly immaterial when looking at the whole of the audit, in other words, you had a different firm auditing a small subsidiary of a multinational company. Well, you know, if that audit is fairly small and immaterial as it relates to the overall audit of the multinational, then you probably would just make no reference to the other auditor. If what the other auditor is doing is fairly material, but for whatever reason the auditor of the overall reports thinks that what they've done is without question, or there's no reason to question the work that was done by the other auditor, such as when you have a fairly substantial auditor doing the other audit report, or where you, the auditing firm, has overseen the work of the other auditor. You're probably just going to make reference to the other auditor in the report. Therefore, you'd have a modified wording in the report, but you would still offer a clean opinion. And then the last One is where you would qualify the opinion or disclaim the opinion depending on the materiality required if the auditor is not willing to assume any responsibility for the work of the other auditor. So, next we're going to talk about the types of audit reports that can be issued other than an unqualified opinion. And so you can have a departure from an unqualified opinion in three instances. First, where there's a scope limitation. Second, where there's a departure from GAAP. And third, where the auditor is not independent. Just briefly talk about that last one. I've never seen this. I mean, I know it's there, that you can't offer an unqualified opinion when you're not independent, but you would have to wonder why the auditor would even take the take on the audit in the first place if they were not independent. I guess the one, and we'll talk about this in future chapters or a future chapter, there might be an instant where when you're doing your due diligence before accepting employment of this audit client where you believe you are independent, and then at some subsequent date to the audit you find out you're not independent. So I mean, there is that situation, but this is so rare. So really, you know, departures from an unqualified opinion are really more of the other two, but we will talk briefly about what you do if the auditor is not independent. All right, so let's talk about scope limitation. When the scope of the audit has been restricted, and this can occur in two ways, where the audit client limits the scope. The second way is where, because of circumstances beyond either the audit firm or the client, the scope of the audit is limited. So why would a company limit the scope of the audit firm, the audit firm's work? Well, we'll talk about that when I come back.